What would you think if I told you that the best way to make a man chase you is by doing absolutely nothing? Not texting him, not checking whether he viewed your story, not asking how his day is going, not finding excuses to stay connected. Nothing. At first, it sounds completely backwards. After all, we're taught that relationships require effort, communication, and consistency. We're told that if we care about someone, we should show it. So when a man starts becoming distant, most women instinctively do the opposite of what actually works. They reach out more. They text more. They worry more. They analyze every conversation, every delay, every change in behavior. And without realizing it, they begin pouring more and more energy into someone who is already pulling away. But this is where psychology reveals something surprising. Carl Jung believed that many of our actions are driven not by conscious choice, but by unconscious fears. One of the greatest fears human beings carry is the fear of abandonment. When someone important begins to feel distant, that fear awakens. Suddenly, you're not responding to reality. You're responding to fear. And fear always wants action. Fear says, text him, check on him, make sure everything is okay. Don't let him forget about you. But what if that fear is exactly what's keeping you trapped? What if the more you chase, the more you lose yourself? Because here's something most people never realize. The moment you become obsessed with someone's attention, you stop paying attention to yourself. Your emotional world begins revolving around their behavior. If they text you, you're happy. If they don't, you're anxious. If they call, you're excited. If they disappear, your entire mood changes. Without noticing, you've handed someone else the keys to your emotional well-being. And that's dangerous, not because they're a bad person, but because your peace should never depend on someone else's consistency. Carl Jung spoke about the process of individuation, the journey of becoming whole. A person becomes whole when they stop seeking themselves through other people. Think about that. How many women spend years trying to be chosen, trying to be loved, trying to be enough, trying to prove their value, trying to convince someone to see what they're worth? But true power begins the moment you stop proving and start knowing. Knowing your value doesn't require validation. Knowing your worth doesn't require permission. And knowing who you are changes the way you love. Because, instead of asking, how do I keep him interested? You begin asking, does this relationship deserve my energy? That single shift changes everything. Most men are accustomed to receiving constant access, constant availability, constant emotional support, constant reassurance. And when that becomes normal, something unfortunate happens. They stop noticing it, not because they don't care, but because human beings naturally adapt to whatever is consistently available. Think about the air you breathe. You rarely notice it, not because it isn't important, but because it's always there. The same thing often happens in relationships. The more available you become, the less your presence is consciously appreciated. And this is why absence can become so powerful. Not because absence creates love, but because absence creates awareness. When your energy is always present, people stop feeling its value. When your energy disappears, they suddenly recognize what was there all along. This isn't manipulation, it's reality. Have you ever noticed how people often realize someone's importance only after they're gone? A friendship, a relationship, a family member, a mentor. The value was always there, but awareness arrived too late. And that's why stepping back can be one of the most revealing things you'll ever do. Because when you stop giving, people reveal who they truly are. Some disappear. Some become angry. Some suddenly become attentive. Some finally make an effort. And each reaction tells you something important. It tells you whether they valued you or merely valued access to you. There's a huge difference. A man who values access enjoys receiving your attention. A man who values you seeks your presence. One misses the benefits. The other misses the person, and silence exposes the difference. This is where many women make a critical mistake. The moment they create distance and the man reacts, they immediately rush back. The second he sends a message, the second he likes a photo, the second he gives a tiny sign of interest, they abandon the boundary they just created. Why? Because they aren't actually seeking respect. They're seeking relief. Relief from uncertainty. Relief from anxiety. Relief from not knowing how he feels. But relief is not the same thing as love. And temporary attention is not the same thing as commitment. Carl Jung understood something profound about human nature. What we avoid confronting controls us. If you're terrified of being alone, loneliness controls you. If you're terrified of rejection, rejection controls you. If you're terrified of losing someone, that fear controls your behavior. And controlled behavior rarely creates healthy relationships. It creates emotional dependency. The strongest position you can ever reach isn't making someone miss you. It's becoming okay whether they do or not. Read that again. The strongest position isn't getting him to chase. It's reaching a place where your happiness no longer depends on whether he chases, because that is freedom. And freedom is attractive. Not because you're trying to attract someone, but because freedom changes your energy. You stop clinging. You stop forcing. You stop chasing certainty from people who aren't offering it. You become calm, grounded, present, whole, and ironically, that's often when people begin noticing you most. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're no longer trying to convince anyone of your value. You're simply living it. Imagine the difference. One woman is constantly checking her phone, wondering if he'll text, analyzing his behavior, waiting for signs. The other woman is building her life, growing, learning, healing, pursuing her goals, creating happiness that exists with or without him. Which woman do you think feels more powerful? Which woman do you think commands more respect? The answer is obvious, and that's because true attraction isn't created through pursuit. It's created through presence. Presence with yourself. Presence with your purpose. Presence with your own life. The moment you stop making someone else the center of your universe, you become the center of your own. And that changes everything. Because now you're no longer asking, "How do I make him chase me?" You're asking a much better question. Why was I chasing someone who wasn't matching my effort in the first place? And once you begin asking that question, a deeper transformation starts to happen. A transformation that has less to do with him and everything to do with you. Because what comes next isn't about silence. It's about understanding the hidden role of ego, attention, and emotional validation in modern relationships. And once you understand that, you'll never see attraction the same way again. Not because silence is a trick, but because silence removes the noise that keeps you attached to fantasy. When you stop chasing, you create space for truth. And truth is often uncomfortable, because truth reveals whether the connection was mutual or one-sided. It reveals whether he was genuinely invested or simply enjoying the attention. It reveals whether your presence mattered or whether your availability did. And while that can hurt, it can also free you, because clarity is always better than confusion. Always. A woman who can sit with silence without panicking has already begun to reclaim her power. Why? Because she is no longer outsourcing her worth to someone else's behavior. She is no longer letting his inconsistency define her value. She is no longer confusing his distance with her inadequacy. Instead, she is observing, watching, learning, and that observation tells her everything she needs to know. Does he step forward when you step back? Does he make an effort when access is no longer automatic? Does he value your presence when it is no longer guaranteed? These are not games. These are revelations, because real interest does not need to be begged for. Real care does not need to be chased. Real connection does not collapse the moment you stop overextending yourself. And if it does, then what you were holding on to was never as solid as you hoped. This is why emotional boundaries matter so much. A boundary is not punishment. It is self-respect in action. It says, "I will not keep giving where there is no reciprocity." It says, "I will not keep proving myself to someone who is not meeting me halfway." It says, "My peace is more important than my fear of losing you." That last sentence is everything. Because fear is what keeps most people stuck. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of being replaced. Fear of not finding someone else. Fear of being alone with their own thoughts. But the moment you stop obeying fear, you begin to see clearly. And clarity is where power begins. Not the power to control him, the power to control yourself, your impulses, your reactions, your need to chase what is not chasing you back. That is real strength. And it is far more attractive than desperation ever could be. Because desperation repels. It creates pressure. It creates neediness. It creates the feeling that someone else is responsible for your emotional stability. But self-possession does the opposite. It creates calm. It creates mystery. It creates the kind of energy that doesn't beg to be chosen because it already knows its own value. And that is what changes the dynamic. Not because you're performing detachment, but because you're actually detached from the outcome. You are no longer trying to force a response. You are no longer trying to manufacture interest. You are no longer trying to earn what should have been freely given. You are simply standing in your own center. And from that place, everything looks different. You see who shows up. You see who disappears. You see who only wanted access. You see who was willing to meet you with depth. And once you see that, you can no longer unsee it, because now you understand that silence is not just absence. It is information. And the woman who learns how to read that information stops wasting her life on people who were never prepared to meet her fully. She stops chasing. She starts choosing. And that is where the real transformation begins. Because the goal was never to make him chase you. The goal was to become so grounded in yourself that you no longer needed to. And once that happens, you don't just change how men respond to you. You change how you respond to yourself. And that is the beginning of everything.